Well, here we are in pretty typical Australian suburbia of the kind of which there's going to be very much more, of course, as the years of the century go on.
After World War II, Australia was to experience a housing boom, which was fueled by the dream of creating a better world and forgetting the pain and suffering that was experienced. Neighbourhoods could finally be safe, and everyone could live happily in peace and harmony. People wanted nothing more than to leave the past behind and move on with their lives. Post-World War II Australian architect Robin Boyd was an icon in the eyes of design. Boyd was a leading proponent for the modern movement in Australian architecture in the 20th century. Good design principles were projected through his remarkable structures, such as the iconic Featherston and Wall Street House. Boyd's design aspiration was to explain how architecture can reflect ourselves and our values as a nation. The functionality and analytical modern approach that Boyd believed in led him to be one of Australia's most successful architects, and he continues to inspire Australian architects and designers till this day. Contemporary architect Kerstin Thompson was personally influenced by Robin Boyd. Thompson is established as a revered Australian architect and urban designer. There is an emphasis on user experience, and like Boyd, she aimed to create meaningful connections with Australia's surroundings and community through her belief that the consideration of people was not a question of ethics, but rather simply of doing one's job, of being professional. Born in Melbourne 1919, Robin Boyd was a leading architect, writer, critic, teacher, social commentator, and furniture designer. Boyd was born into a family of artists. From a young age, his father Theodore and mother Edith were able to provide inspiration to a growing mind. Early education for Boyd included studying at night at the Melbourne Technical College and the Melbourne University Architectural Workshop. During the time of his studies, he also worked during the day in the office of A&K Henderson. It was here that his growing passion for modernist ideas evolved. By 1939, while still in university, Boyd was quickly making himself known by editing the journal Smudges, where he provided sometimes controversial criticism to local buildings in Melbourne's architectural culture by defining them as either a blot or bouquet. In 1947, Boyd became the director of the Small Home Service, set up by the Royal Victorian Institute of Architects in conjunction with The Age. The Small Home Service was to become a monumental establishment during the post-war boom, as it aimed to popularise the modern home and make them accessible to the public during a time where building materials were scarce. It was a small home service that led Boyd to become a household name. During this time, he continued with lecturing and was renowned for his incisive voice and charismatic presentation. Throughout Boyd's career, he published many inspiring books, including The New Architecture, The Victorian Modern, Australia's Home, Living in Australia, and his most well-known, honest, and somewhat controversial book, The Australian Ugliness. Being an advocate of good design, The Australian Ugliness articulates a raw complaint about Australian suburban taste and its flaws, a rejection against decoration and ornament, and a rage against featureism. Jumping forward to contemporary architect Kerstin Thompson, was born in Melbourne in 1965. After completing her Masters in Architecture at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in 1989, Thompson went on to work at the Milan-based studio of Mateo Thun, then the Melbourne-based practice Robertson Chen, as well as lecturing. Since 1994, Thompson has been running her own well-recognised architectural firm, Kerstin Thompson Architects, also known as KTA. In 2014, she won the Robin Boyd Award for Residential Architecture for House at Hanging Rock, one of her most monumental structures. Thompson is recognised for her sympathetic connections with the landscape and the community in which her designs occupy. The modernist movement of the 1950s to 1960s sought for a freer lifestyle, and in that Boyd designed an abundance of domestic structures in which freedom was reflected in the open plan living interior. One room would flow into another seamlessly. The Featherston House, built in 1967 in Ivanhoe, Melbourne, embodied this modernist principle impeccably. As Boyd wrote in Living in Australia, conflict between the opposed desires of privacy and freedom, between the cell and the great hall, both of which we all need to be able to experience on our own terms at our own timing. The house was quite radical at the time. It was based on the theme of living in a garden. With consideration to the Australian landscape, Boyd designed the Featherston House using new materials such as glass, brick, wood, and metal. The geometric, large-scale windows allow light to flow through the house freely, inviting the Australian environment in. Backdrops for living is how Boyd would describe his houses. The Wall Street House, located in South Yarra, Melbourne, was designed for his family in 1957. There is consideration of Australia's unique conditions as Boyd uses structural innovation through the central courtyard that is surrounded by an abundance of glass windows, which allows light and warmth to flow through the house while still protecting the inside from strong winds. Affordable, prefabricated homes were essential during these years. The use of reinforced concrete, brick, and wood were inexpensive yet practical when designing a new mode for living. Australia was experiencing industrial and commercial expansion after thousands of soldiers returned from the war. Boyd believed that design needed to shape our cultural behaviours and our national modernist agenda. Modernism was entering the mind of the general public, and there was an uprise of demand for housing to accommodate the current times and the baby boom. The Small Home Service educated Australians on modern design through weekly articles written in The Age. The Small Home Service soon provided 1/10 of houses being built in the metropolitan area, 1/8 by 1951, in some almost 5,000 houses by 1952. It enabled everyday people to build well-designed homes for an affordable price. Like the Featherston and Wall Street House, these homes showcase technical innovation and standardization through new materials. Boyd believed that Australia could create architectural equal to the world's best if only a few architects would take the lead in educating public taste. Boyd's modern approach to architecture continues to inspire designers today. Kerstin Thompson expresses elements of Boyd's values in contemporary design. Thompson is one of the most outspoken women in the industry and believes that, as an architect, you can have a clear design intent about something, but you need to think about how to make it buildable. In the early years of her career, she won multiple awards for her domestic buildings. Although as a confident, ambitious woman, she did not want to be associated with only specializing in housing. As she would say, you have to be very careful, especially as a woman, not to be pigeonholed into a certain type of work. She has spent time designing police stations, bypass sound walls, civic, commercial, and educational structures. In projects such as Vic Urban's Homes for Life, Thompson prioritised environmental and social sustainability whilst designing the homes, which focus on affordability and functionality. The homes were designed to nest nicely together while still remaining sympathetic to surrounding Australian landscape. Thompson's house at Hanging Rock uses structural innovation as the house faces an east-west direction, allowing light to flow through the house naturally. The house sits on staggered levels, separating rooms while creating a seamless flow from the exterior through to the interior. This allows for the house to sit comfortably in the surrounding landscape. Modern materials were used as the floors and walls are made out of concrete. The plywood ceilings enhance the interior colour palette, and the large-scale windows allow attention to be focused on the Australian bushland surrounding. Thompson believed that ethical design accommodates difference. Design needs to be a way of thinking, as it serves an obligation to the public, the client, and the environment. Good design is projected through the physical elements of the structure. But for good design to be truly executed, the designer needs to consider a broad range of elements. Is it sustainable? Is it affordable, functional, ergonomic, sympathetic? Does it accommodate for a modern nation? Robin Boyd and Kerstin Thompson are the key Australian advocates for good design, Boyd being one of the most influential architects from his time, and Thompson following the same fundamental principles, together have shaped Australia in the eyes of architecture and design.